She walked into the most expensive cake shop in Philadelphia with $347 in a glass jar. Worn jeans, cheap sandals, a cloth bag over one shoulder. She did not look around at the crystal display cases or the gold lettering on the walls or the towering cakes sitting under soft lighting like they belonged in a museum. She walked straight to the center display and pointed at the largest one. "That one," she said. "The celebration cake. Can you box it quickly? I need to get back to my mother." The two girls behind the counter looked at each other. That look said everything. It was the kind of look people exchange when they have already decided something about a person before that person has finished their first sentence. Quick, practiced. The specific cruelty of people who think they are being subtle. The taller one, Kelsey, turned to her colleague Brianna and read the price off the label out loud. Not to inform the customer. To embarrass her. $340. It landed in the room like a door slamming. Lena Farrow did not flinch. She was 33 years old. She had been working multiple jobs for 6 years. A data entry clerk from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. at an insurance office in Germantown, and a cashier 3 evenings a week at a pharmacy on Broad Street. She got up at 6 a.m. and she got home at 9 p.m. and somewhere in the middle of all of that she paid rent and bought groceries and picked up her mother's heart medication from the pharmacy counter after her own shift ended, so she could save the delivery fee. She had stood in rooms where people looked at her like she did not belong. She had learned a long time ago that the look said more about them than it ever said about her. She said, "I know the price. I would like to buy it." That is when the manager walked over. Priya Mack. Late 30s. Immaculate cream blazer. The kind of smile that has the right shape but carries no warmth behind it. She had managed this flagship Hale's Patisserie location for 3 years, and she had a very clear picture of what kind of customer belonged in this store and what kind had wandered in by mistake. She looked at Lena's sandals. The kind you buy at a discount store for $12 because the ones that last longer cost $40 and $40 is not in the budget this month. Then her jeans. Faded at the knees from wear, not from fashion. Then back at her face. She said, "Ma'am, that particular cake is reserved for special occasions. Perhaps something from our everyday selection would be more suitable. We have lovely options starting at $40. She said it pleasantly, generously even in her own estimation. She was offering a solution. Lena said, "It is a special occasion." Priya waited with the smile still in place. Lena said, "My mother is 58 years old. She has never had a birthday cake. Not once in her entire life. Today that changes." Brianna made a sound. Small. The beginning of a laugh she tried to pull back behind her palm. She did not pull it back fast enough. Kelsey turned slightly away from the counter. Her shoulders moved once. 3 customers who had been browsing the far display cases looked up at the sound. Lena did not look at any of them. She did not look at the ceiling or the floor or the door. She kept her eyes on Priya because she was not ashamed of a single thing about why she was standing there, and she was not going to behave as though she was. She set it on the glass counter directly in front of Priya without saying a word. The jar was the size of a large mason jar. Inside it were coins, quarters, dimes, nickels, and small bills folded carefully and pressed down through the lid. Ones, fives, a few tens. All of them placed there carefully, one by one, since January. Every dollar she could spare after rent, after groceries, after her mother's heart medication that cost $67 a month and went up to $74 in February. After the electricity bill and the bus fare and the small things that add up to the difference between surviving and not surviving when you are doing it alone. She had been saving since January. For months of counting. For months of folding. For months of the jar sitting on the kitchen shelf getting heavier, slowly, the way things get heavier when you pour enough of yourself into them. The jar was full. The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of a nice shop on a Tuesday afternoon. Something else. The kind of quiet that falls when something undeniably true walks into a space and every person in it feels it at the same time even before they can say what it is. But Priya did not soften. She hardened. She straightened the lapel of her blazer with one finger. She looked at the jar the way a person looks at something they have decided is beneath the room they are standing in. She said, "Ma'am, we cannot accept payment in that form. This is a patisserie. I am going to have to ask you to step aside. Lena said, It is real money. Every single dollar in there is real money. Priya said, I understand that. But this establishment has a standard to maintain, and accepting loose change and folded bills from a jar is not. Lena said, Your establishment has a sign outside that says everyone is welcome. I am standing here with more than the price of that cake. I would like to buy it. Priya tilted her head slightly. The smile sharpened. She said, I think we both know this is not the right place for you today. 7 words. Said pleasantly. Said professionally. But every person in that room heard exactly what those 7 words meant. Every single one of them. Lena stood very still. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She had not come here to perform anything for anyone. She had come to buy her mother a birthday cake with money she had been saving since January, and she was not moving from this counter until she had it or until someone physically made her leave. She looked at the jar sitting on the glass case. She thought about the first dollar she had put in it. A Tuesday in January when the temperature was 19 degrees and she had walked to the bus stop in the dark at 7 a.m. and told herself that this year was going to be different. That this year her mother was going to have something real. She looked at Priya. She looked at the jar. She was not moving. And that was the exact moment the door to Hale's Patisserie opened. Linton Pierce walked into his own store. No suit. Dark jacket. A coffee from the place 2 doors down that he had been going to for 4 years because the woman who ran it had known his mother and always asked after her. He owned the shop. And one look at the counter told him something ugly had happened under his name. He was 40 years old. He had built Hale's Patisserie from a single rented kitchen and a second-hand commercial oven when he was 26. 6 locations now across Philadelphia. 2 more openings in the next 18 months. His name was on a building at the community college where he had taken his first business course with $800 in his pocket and a notebook he bought at a dollar store on the way to class. Before all of that, he had been a boy on Allegheny Avenue in North Philadelphia, where some nights there was no food in the kitchen and his mother sat at the table and stared at the wall so he would not see her face. He still came into his stores unannounced sometimes. He wanted to see them the way his customers saw them. Not the prepared version. The real version. 3 seconds was all he needed. Woman at the counter. Glass jar in front of her. Cloth bag over her shoulder. Spine completely straight. Eyes steady and level and not going anywhere. Not performing pain. Not begging. Not shrinking. Just holding her ground the way someone holds it when they have been doing it their whole life and have stopped expecting any credit for it. The manager across from her with a smile that Linton had grown up on the receiving end of. He knew exactly what that smile said. He had learned to read it at 12 years old and he had never forgotten the lesson. He walked forward. Priya saw him. Her entire posture changed. The practiced composure shifted into something more careful. She said, Mr. Pierce, we were just handling a situation with a customer. He did not look at Priya. He looked at the woman at the counter. He said, What is the situation? His voice was even. The kind of quiet that does not need volume to carry. Lena looked at him. She did not know who he was. She saw a man in a jacket who had just walked through the front door. That was all she had time to register. She said, I came to buy a birthday cake for my mother. Your staff told me I cannot afford it. I have the money. They will not take it. Linton looked at the glass jar on the counter. Then he looked at her face. Something moved through him before he could name it. Something about the way her eyes held. The particular quality of stillness in her. The quiet force in the set of her jaw. He had seen that somewhere. He could not reach where. But something in him recognized it the way you recognize a sound from a long time ago before you can place where you heard it. He turned to Priya. 1 word. Explain. Priya explained. Store standards. Customer experience. The image of the brand. The type of clientele that Hale's Patisserie was designed to serve and the responsibility she had to protect that. She said all of it carefully and professionally, and she meant every word of it. Linton listened. Then he said, You looked at what she was wearing and you made a decision. It was not a question. He said, The jar. Did anyone count what is in it? Priya, no sir. We did not feel it was necessary to. He said, Count it. He said it the same way he said everything. Without drama. Without performance. Brianna moved to the jar immediately. Everyone in the store watched Brianna count. She worked carefully, emptied the coins and sorted them, unfolded each bill and laid it flat, worked through the pile from left to right without rushing. Nobody spoke. The refrigeration units behind the display cases hummed. Outside on Chestnut Street, the city moved past the windows like it always did. People walking, cars passing. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon that had no idea what was happening inside this room. Brianna finished. She looked up. She said, $347. The celebration cake cost $347 more than the price on the label. Linton nodded once. He looked at Priya for a long moment. He did not say a word to her. The number sitting on that counter said everything that needed saying about what had happened in this store in the last 20 minutes. He turned back to Lena. He said, I am sorry for how you were treated. That is not what this store is. He said, your mother's cake will be ready in 10 minutes. It is on the house. Lena looked at him, and she shook her head. Not dramatically. Not with any performance behind it. Quietly and with complete certainty, the way a person refuses something when their dignity is simply not available for negotiation. She said, I did not come here for charity. I came to buy my mother a cake with money I saved. For months of saving. Please take the money and give me the cake. Linton looked at her. He had met a lot of people in his life. Built a company from nothing over 15 years. Sat in rooms with people who had 10 times what he had and twice the ego to go with it. He had developed over many years a very accurate sense of character. Of who people actually were underneath the version they presented. What he was reading right now stopped him completely. Because that refusal, the flat, dignified, non-negotiable refusal of a free cake from the owner of the store, after being humiliated in front of a room full of people, was one of the most striking things he had witnessed in a very long time. Not what she said. How she said it. As if accepting charity was simply not an option she had considered. As if she had come here for one thing and she was going to leave with exactly that thing or nothing at all. He said, Can I ask your name? She said, Lena. Lena Farrow. Linton Pierce went completely frozen. The name moved through him like something cold. He said it quietly, almost to himself. So quiet only she could hear it. Farrow. Then, Dolores Farrow. Lena stared at him. She said, You know my mother? He did not answer immediately. Because 28 years had just arrived in the space between two sentences and there is no preparation for that. The debt you have carried does not announce when it is finally ready to come home. It waits. And then one afternoon a woman says her name in your own store and everything you thought you had managed to quietly put somewhere comes loose all at once. He said, I grew up on Allegheny Avenue, 2 blocks from Hunting Park, Building 12. He said, Your mother was in Building 14. He said, I was 12 years old. I remember a little girl. Small. She had serious eyes. She used to sit on the front step in the evenings sometimes. Lena went silent. Something changed in the way she looked at him. She wasn't convinced. Not yet. But she was watching him now with the same caution that had carried her through the last 30 minutes. She was not going to let a story soften her guard. She had not come this far by letting stories do that. She said, What did she look like? My mother. Back then. He said. She wore her hair pinned back. She almost always had an apron. She was the kind of woman who moved through a room like she knew exactly why she was there and had no patience for anything that was going to slow her down. Lena said, What else? He said, She cooked every evening. I could smell it through the wall between our apartments. She always cooked more than her family needed. And every single night she knocked on our door. His voice changed. It got slower, heavier. He said, She never asked if we were hungry. She already knew and she did not make us say it. She just knocked and handed my mother a plate and said, Eat while it is hot. And then she went back to her kitchen. He paused. He said, She did that for 2 years. Every night. Not once did she make us feel like we were a burden. Not once did she remind us or hold it over us or use it as anything. She just knocked. Gave. Went back. He said, Until my mother finally got steady work and we moved. We left quickly. I never said goodbye properly. I never got to thank her. And I have thought about that for 28 years. The store was completely silent. Every person in it. Priya, Kelsey, Brianna. The three customers who had stopped pretending to look at anything else a long time ago. Lena's eyes were wet. She was holding them back. But they were there. She said slowly, "How is your mother?" He said, "She is well. She is in Delaware now." Lena was quiet for a moment. He said, "How is yours?" Lena's face shifted. She said, "She is not well. Her heart. She doesn't leave the apartment much anymore. She gets tired very fast. But she is still here. She is still fighting." He nodded. He said, "I need to come with you." Lena looked at him. A stranger. A man she had met 20 minutes ago in a cake shop. Asking to come to her mother's home. Claiming to know things about her mother's past that she had never heard before. She said, "I don't know you." He said, "I know that. I know you have no reason to trust what I have just told you. But I have been carrying a debt to your mother for 28 years and I looked for her twice and lost track both times and I am standing in front of her daughter right now and I cannot let today end without doing something about this." He said, "Please." Lena looked at the jar in her hands. She looked at the man in front of her. He was not performing anything. He was not selling her anything. He had the expression of a person who has been waiting to say something for a very long time and has finally found the right door. She thought about her mother sitting in the chair by the window. The way Dolores had been sitting in that chair more and more in recent months because standing wore her out. The way she still cooked sometimes even when it tired her. The way she still asked about everyone else first before she would admit how she was feeling. Lena looked at him. She said, "She is going to say you are being too much." The corner of his mouth moved. The smallest beginning of a smile. He said, "I know." She said, "She never accepted anything from anybody without an argument." He said, "That does not surprise me in the least." A long moment. Lena picked up her cloth bag. She said, "Okay." Before they left, Linton turned back to the counter. He walked to where Priya was standing. Kelsey beside her. Brianna a half step back. He stood there without speaking for a moment. He said, "Priya, you have worked in this store for 4 years." She said, "Mr. Pierce, I was acting in the best interest of the brand." He said, "In 4 years I have never walked into this location and watched one of my managers prepare to remove a paying customer because of what she was wearing." He said, "The woman you humiliated today is the daughter of the woman who fed me when I was a child. When my mother had nothing and was too proud to knock on anyone's door. When I was 12 years old and going to bed hungry 2 blocks from where we are standing right now." He said, "Your cruelty today was aimed at the daughter of the woman who kept me alive." Silence. He said, "You are all dismissed. Effective today. HR will be in contact." Priya said, "You cannot." He said, "That is not a conversation." He looked at the young woman standing quietly in the back. The one who had not laughed once. The one who had counted every coin and every bill without hesitation when he asked. He said, "Box the celebration cake. Add the macarons from the second shelf and the chocolate truffles from the left case. You still have your job." He picked up the glass jar and walked back to Lena and placed it in her hands. She said, "I still want to pay for it myself." He said, "You will. When we get there, you give it to her yourself." They drove north through the city. Linton watched out the window as Center City gave way to North Philly the way it always had. Buildings shorter. Streets tighter. Corner stores with hand-painted signs. Row houses packed close together with stoops that people actually used. Kids on bikes in the late afternoon. He had not driven through this part of the city in a long time. He had never forgotten it. But there is a difference between carrying a place in you and actually returning to it. The first is memory. The second is something more complicated. Lena sat beside him. She said, "She always said she was just doing what neighbors do." He said, "She was not doing what neighbors do. Neighbors wave from across the street. Neighbors hold a package when you are out. What your mother did was something most people with twice as much as she had would never choose to do every single night for 2 years without once expecting anything back." He said, You cannot know what a plate of food means to a hungry child. And it is never just the food. It is the fact that someone saw you, that in a world that was moving right past you, someone stopped and decided you mattered. I built everything I have on the memory of that. Every time it got hard. Every time someone told me I did not belong somewhere. I thought about your mother knocking on that door. About what it cost her to do it. About the fact that she chose to anyway. Lena said, "She never told me any of that." He said, "Of course she didn't." She looked at him. He said, "The people who do the most real good in the world are always the ones who never say a word about it." The car turned onto Allegheny Avenue. Linton went quiet. He looked at the block. Different stores on the corners. A new playground where he remembered a vacant lot. But the same narrow houses packed together. The same angle of late afternoon light falling between the buildings. The same feeling of a neighborhood that had been through a great deal and was still standing because of the kind of people who lived in it and chose to stay. He had grown up one block over. He had not stood on this street in years. He breathed in slowly. They went up 2 flights of stairs. Lena knocked twice, then used her key. She called out, "Mama, I am home, and I brought someone." Dolores Farrow was sitting in a chair by the window, 58 years old, thinner than she had been. The heart condition had taken something from her frame over the past 2 years. She moved carefully these days. The careful way of someone whose body has become something to negotiate with rather than something that simply obeys. But her posture was still straight. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. And her eyes were exactly what they had always been. Full and warm and completely present. The eyes of a woman who had been paying close attention to the world her entire life and had no intention of letting that stop now. She saw Lena first. The real smile. The one she reserved for her daughter coming home. Then she saw the large cake box. "Lena, that is too much, you did not have to." Then she saw the man standing behind her daughter in the doorway. She looked at his face. Something happened in her expression. Something that moved faster than thought. Faster than recognition usually moves. The kind of knowing that lives in the body long before the mind finishes processing it. She looked at him for one long moment. She said, "Marcus?" He had not told Lena that name. His legal name was Linton, and that was what the world knew him by. His mother had called him Marcus. The neighbors on the old block had called him that. People who knew him before he became what he became. Dolores remembered what the rest of the world had left behind. He said, "Ms. Dolores." She said, "You look exactly like your mother." Around the eyes. He crossed the room and knelt down on the floor in front of her chair. A man worth $180 million on the floor of a small apartment in North Philadelphia. He had decided in the car that he was going to say all of it clearly, without managing himself too carefully. She had never managed herself around them. He was not going to manage himself around her. He said, "I never got to thank you." He said, "For 2 years you fed us. Every single night you knocked on that door and handed my mother a plate, and you never once made either of us feel like a burden. Never reminded us. Never used it. Never made my mother feel small for needing help. You just knocked and gave and went back to your kitchen." He said, "My mother used to cry after you left. Not from shame. From relief. Because in a world that was moving right past us like we were invisible, you stopped every single night and did something. Not because we were connected to you by anything other than a shared wall and a shared street and your own choice to care." He said, "I looked for you twice after I started building something. Lost track both times. I did not know you had stayed here." His voice was still steady, but it was the steady of someone holding something heavy rather than something light. He said, "I am 28 years late, and I am saying it now." He said, "Thank you. For every plate. For every knock on that door. For seeing us." Dolores looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. The same smile Lena had seen her whole life. The one that came from somewhere deeper than whatever the present moment was offering. She put her hand on his face. Old hands. Worn smooth from decades of use. Warm the way certain hands are warm because of what they have spent their life doing with themselves. She said, "Marcus, you were hungry. That is all." He said, It was not all. It was everything. She kept her hand on his face and looked at him steadily. She said, "Did you build something good?" He said, "I tried to." She looked at him for another moment. She said, "Then I did not waste those plates." Nobody spoke for a moment after that line landed. It settled over the room like something final and true. Lena set the cake box on the small table by the window. She opened it. The celebration cake from Hale's Patisserie. White frosting. Gold lettering. The most beautiful thing in the most expensive cake shop in Philadelphia. She reached into her cloth bag. She pulled out the glass jar. She set it on the table beside the cake. She said, "Mama, we are paying for this ourselves." Dolores looked at the jar, then at her daughter. Then she laughed. She said, "Lena baby, where did you get all that?" Lena said, 4 months. Don't say a word. Just let me do this." Dolores held her lips together. Her eyes were shining. Lena lit the candles. 58 of them. One for every year. She had bought them 2 weeks before and kept them in her bedroom drawer. Every morning when she opened the drawer to get her watch, she saw them sitting there and thought today is getting closer, and felt something in her chest that was equal parts hope and love, and the particular ache of wanting something badly enough that you are already afraid of how much it will mean. 58 candles burning in a small North Philadelphia apartment on a Tuesday afternoon. For a woman who had spent her entire life making sure other people had warmth and light and had never once asked for any in return. Dolores looked at them for a long moment. She said, "This is too much." Lena said, "Mama, just blow them out." Dolores laughed. Full. Warm. The kind of laugh that fills a small room completely and makes everyone inside it feel like they are exactly where they need to be. She took a breath. She blew out every single one. Linton sat in the chair across the small room and started clapping. And then the laugh came out of him. A real one. Not the controlled version he kept in reserve for boardrooms and press photographs. The one from before all of that. The one that had belonged to a 12-year-old boy on Allegheny Avenue who used to smell dinner through the wall and feel something ease in his chest because someone on the other side of it cared whether he ate. Dolores pointed at him from across the room. She said, "You still laugh exactly the same way you did when you were 12 years old." He said, "I did not know you remembered that." She said, "Marcus, I remember everything about every child on that block." She looked at him. She said, "How is your mother?" He said, "She is well. She is in Delaware now. She would not believe this. I am going to call her tonight and I do not know how to explain it." Dolores smiled. She said, "Tell her Dolores says hello. And tell her that boy of hers turned out just fine." In the weeks that followed, Linton made sure Dolores got the cardiac care she needed. Quietly. The appointments, the medication, the costs, handled without fanfare, the way certain debts are honored when they come from gratitude instead of display. And on the kitchen shelf, beside the sugar tin and the chipped blue mug Dolores had used for years, the glass jar stayed where Lena put it after that day. Not empty. Not filled again. Just there. A reminder that for 4 months a daughter had been building something beautiful $1 at a time for a mother who had spent 58 years giving more than she ever kept for herself. The next Tuesday morning sunlight came through the apartment window and landed on the cake box Dolores still refused to throw away. Lena was in the kitchen making tea. Dolores was in her chair by the window. And for the first time in a very long time, nothing in that room felt borrowed. Some debts do not disappear. They change the way you live after. Some doors open exactly when they were always supposed to. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or made you think differently about dignity, sacrifice, and the lasting power of kindness, please subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear this today. Because the truth is, people may forget your name, your face, or what you owned, but they never forget who fed them when they were hungry, who stood by them when life was hard, and who treated them with dignity when the world did not. Dolores gave without knowing what would come back. Lena stood tall without begging for pity. And in the end, that quiet goodness found its way home. Until next time, stay humble, stay compassionate, and never believe that what you do for others is too small to matter. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this one. And leave a comment telling us, was Linton's return true justice? Or was it a beautiful repayment that still came too late,